And we are back on the build phase. I'm Mr. Ben. And today I want to talk about uh this is versus related, but it's going to be a long walk to get there. So I want to start by talking about what I did last Friday, which was drive to Dyersville, like hour and a half from where I live, to compete in a Star Wars Unlimited tournament. And at that event, I bumped into Mitch and Kayla from the Versus community, which was really fun to run into some Versus players out in the wild competing in another game. And it kind of got me thinking. Now, I have been considering doing a show about Star Wars Unlimited because I think people who like Versus are very likely to find a lot of things to love about how Star Wars Unlimited plays. And I may still do that at some point, but that's not what I want to talk about today. What I want to talk about today is TCG versus LCG. I want to talk about distribution models because I have conflicted and contradictory feelings on this topic, and I'm not totally sure what I think about it, but I have like a constellation of data points that I want to fill in and then maybe see if by the time I reach the end of laying out my case here, if I can come to some conclusions. I don't know. We'll see. This may be a rambly episode. So, first of all, I started playing card games with Magic the Gathering, with trading card games. And everybody who has spent time in that environment talks about how expensive it is to keep up. The constant, every few months, there's new cards. You have to get the new cards. Your old cards are less good. Oh, they used to be really valuable. Now they're not valuable. There's the playing the market element of it, which is very repellent to some people, which I understand. There's the chase of it, which can be very repellent. There's the lottery packs, as I have often derisively called them, element. Like all of that stuff is just true. Those are flaws in the TCG system. But that doesn't mean that the LCG system doesn't also have flaws. So let's dig into that for a little bit. So I kind of laid out a lot of the criticisms that people have of the lottery pack system. The expense, you don't know what you're getting. Loot boxes are a term that didn't really exist when I started playing Magic, but that's exactly what TCG packs are. They are real world meat space loot boxes. So you are getting something that you could potentially resell, maybe, which is a little different than like a video game loot box, but it's the same basic concept, which is something I have never really liked. I like knowing what I'm going to get when I buy a product. Randomness in product acquisition is super annoying. So that's an advantage that LCGs have is you know what you're going to get in the box. You don't have to spend a ton of money buying things you don't actually want, looking for the thing that you do want. But let's lay out some flaws in the LCG model. So it is true that when you open a pack of random cards and you get that $100 card, there's that gambler's high, that dopamine hit. And that's fun in the moment, but arguably not the not the most healthy thing to be chasing after in our games. But there's something. It's not just that moment. It carries on. Like when you go back through your cards later, and it's like, oh, I got this cool rare. Oh, I have this and that. And there is a level of like emotional engagement that these random packs can kind of pull out of people that LCGs just can't compete with. There just isn't a corollary. And because of the randomness, because you don't know what you're getting, the consumer does end up spending more money. And while that's a negative to the consumer, the positive to the manufacturer, distributor, designer, etc., is that they have a more profitable product. They have something where there's a steady stream of cash coming in. And this is, I think, a really important variable. We have throughout time throughout throughout the entire life of Versus, there has been post after post about how hard it is to get a local scene going. And this is for a number of reasons. There's nothing in it for the stores. After I make my initial $25 purchase of the product, the store has made their 27%, 30%, whatever markup is at your particular store over wholesale. And that's all the money they're going to make off that Versus product. So the next weekend, when me and my buddies come in and we want to play versus and have a tournament, the store has to choose between the guys who might buy a few sodas or the guys who are going to buy sodas plus 5 packs a piece so they can play MTG sealed. And that's kind of a no-brainer for a small business owner. For a local business that runs on the thinnest of margins, they either have to have personal buy-in, like you look at a store like Epic Loot in Ohio. A big part of the reason that store does versus events is because Scott is a versus fan. If the owner, if the prime mover at that store was not a versus fan, I don't know that we would see events at that store. My store owner is not a versus fan and not a huge fan of Upper Deck in general, particularly with these recent changes. Uh, so getting him to do events was like basically asking him to do a favor for me. And that's tough. So that's one half of it. That's the store half of it. The other half of it is the player half, and that is things like prizing. So with lottery pack games, you can give people packs as prizes, and that's tantalizing because yeah, maybe it's going to be a $5 rare, but maybe it's going to be a $700 showcase. Ooh, and that brings out more players because the prizes have these higher values. Now, personally, I don't care that much about the prizes. I want to compete. That's generally why I'm there. But it's just true to get other competitors to the table. Not everybody feels the way I do. Not everybody is like, hey, I just want to show up and test my skills, test my decks, and have fun playing the game. And I get that. There are people that have choices to make. Are you going to play versus for no prizes, or are you going to play Star Wars Unlimited for $1,000 in prizes or $5,000 in prizes? And that's just another place where the LCG model really struggles to compete. Yes, we have had Hobby League stuff. Yes, we have had the OP packs, but once everybody gets that stuff, you can't, like, there have not been enough OP packs. There's not been a steady enough stream of prizing to keep people coming and willing to pay. Because essentially, paying for the opportunity to get the prizing is the only place where the stores can make money on versus events. That just is what it is. And most stores have to make money. Most stores don't have a shop owner who's willing to kind of do a favor for for the local versus guy. I mean, they probably would once you establish that relationship. But that's is what it is. There's no stores who are banging down Upper Deck store trying to run versus events because there's nothing in it for the stores, and there aren't a lot of competitive players banging down the doors trying to compete because there's not a lot in it for them. Like those of us that are here because we are really, really passionate about the game because the gameplay is so good. And I hate to put it this way. It hurts me to put it this way, but I think the truth is that solid gameplay just isn't good enough. You also have to have these other pieces in place. The marketing is something that Upper Deck has received a lot of criticism for over the years. Or should I say the lack of marketing, the lack of community engagement. There's just so many like low to no cost things Upper Deck could do, and many things that have price tags attached to them that Upper Deck could do to help versus survive and thrive. And they just don't seem that interested in pushing this game. And it just is what it is. And I hate to see the way, like, I'm desperate for competitive events. I would love to be able to go play at my local store. I'd love to be able to drive the next town or two towns over and play versus events, but that's just not happening. So the reality is, while in middle age now, I like the idea of being able to purchase a game and have all the cards that I need and then go compete against other people and not have to worry about trying to chase down some $30 rare or any of that stuff. I don't like that part of it. But it seems like I'm really struggling having one without the other because Star Wars is brand new. Like this game's only a few months old, and I played in a 17-person event Friday and then a bigger, I don't even know how many people it was, more than 20 people event Sunday, and I couldn't even make it to the event Saturday because my kid was too tired. Could you imagine a world where there's so much versus events going on that you can't make it to all the events, even though they're literally down the road from you? That's, unheard of. That's crazy. Like the idea that uh, there's going to be another tournament half an hour north of me on June 1st and another one 45 minutes east of me on June 2nd. So there is so many opportunities to play. And I think what I'm becoming what I'm being forced to like contend with and wrestle with is we can't pin this on IP. We can't go, "Oh, Star Wars has a big fan base." Dude, Marvel has a big fan base. And the Marvel fans are not coming out of the woodwork to play versus. Some of that is the problem with the marketing. Sure. Once we get people to play this game, they do really like it. But for the hardcore player, the people who what they want to do is compete in tournaments, yeah, webcam is cool, but it's not the same as going in and spending a day in a room with other people who are passionate about the game that you're playing. There is just something that has been missing for me from Versus. I just don't have the ability to travel 8, 10 hours, to have to take a flight, to commit a whole weekend to play in one Versus tournament. That's just not a realistic thing for me with where I'm at in my life. But I can pick my kid up from school and get on the road immediately and drive to the next town over and have a 17 person event on a Friday night with like prizes that we're excited about, with people that I don't necessarily know every single person in the room already. Now, there is something to be said with how cool the Versus community is and how we kind of all know each other and like the respect for the most part that that engenders. And it is a little bit of a slap in the face when I have been competing in Star Wars events and remembering, oh yeah, there is such a thing as players who do really toxic stuff. I kind of forgot you guys existed. I mean, not really. Like in the abstract, I'm super aware that there are such a thing as slow players who get salty that they're going to lose and try to play as slowly as possible to prevent the game from concluding. Yeah, I'm super familiar conceptually with those people, but it's not something I've run into in Versus. And I think that's another like data point in favor of the LCG model is those of us that are here are not here because we've been wooed by prizes or wooed by IP. We're here because we're committed to the game. And given that it's a smaller community, there is like some reputational currency. And I think that just makes people, generally speaking, behave better. And that's cool. I've been spoiled by how awesome the Versus community is over the last many years. And I definitely had some frustrating experiences in playing Star Wars competitively already. But at the end of the day, I think the thing that I most want to do is have the opportunity to play, is to be able to compete for cool prizes, even if they're just a card, even if it's just a different art on a card that I already have. That's a thing to compete for. That's fun. I'm willing to go spend $10 to try to get a unique card treatment and just all of these bells and whistles, all of the things that I think go along with the competitive card game. We just don't get them in verses, or we get very little of it, just a trickle of it. And it's been like man, I feel so conflicted here because on the one hand, as Upper Deck has tried different things over the years, I've been really like optimistic, like, hey, this is a great idea. They're moving in this direction. I really like the hobby league stuff. That's cool. I really like that they're moving tournaments out of cons and into LGSs. That's cool. So they've done cool things, but it's just so hard for me to look at where Versus is at after close to 10 years. I mean, we're creeping up on it. 10 years for this game. And then I look at where this Star Wars is at 2 months in, 3 months in, and it's just I cannot understand. It's like I've been living on a calorie restricted diet, and I just walked into the candy store. And it's like what this whole landscape of sort of I want to eat the food of competitive play, and other than webcam stuff, which it presents its own types of difficulties and is frankly just not quite the same as that in person. I want that in person tournament experience, and I realize that I have been missing, deeply missing the ability to get up on a Sunday, drive to a shop, play a match, and be home that evening and still able to make dinner for the family. Like that kind of thing is not something that Versus has ever provided for me. Every Versus tournament is in a con. It They've never come anywhere near me, really. I mean, Milwaukee isn't even that close to where I live. That's probably the closest one. Um, so, I mean, I love Versus, and I love the distribution model of buy a pack and get all the cards. At the same time, it seems maybe it's not a problem with the distribution model. Maybe it is specifically with how Upper Deck is handling the game and the choices they've made. Maybe the LCG model could support the kind of frequent play that I would like to be able to be a part of in the Versus community. But at this point, we're 10 years in, and I think we just have to accept that the game is what it is. What we have gotten these years is what we're going to continue to get. And if that's the case, it's hard not to put some of the blame on the LCG model. It's not profitable enough for Upper Deck to do the marketing, to make the promos, to entice the competitive players, to have the profit margins and volume of sales for the local game stores. Just at the end of the day, it feels like while it's a very consumer friendly model and there's a lot of things that I really like about it, and I really don't like coming to this conclusion, but it feels like the LCG distribution model is kind of a failure. If what you ultimately want to be able to do is compete in tournaments and have a competitive card game, I just don't see how it's able to be sustainable. I mean, Versus gave it a good shot. We've had an excellent run, but it's on some level I've been kind of kidding myself. Yeah. Oh, yeah, we've got these tournaments 4 times a year. That's and then Gen Con, like that's a cool, vibrant, competitive scene. And it is by Versus standards, but compared to other games where there are independent organizations putting on tournaments multiple times a month, as well as official tournaments, as well as local game store level tournaments, and just on and on and on. There's so many different ways to be able to compete. And if what you want out of a game is to be able to have lots of places to go and compete and see different looks and play different decks, I just, it seems like the LCG distribution model, the one and done purchase model, just can't sustain that. Again, for all the reasons I already listed, the profit isn't there for the local game stores to put the events on. The profit isn't there for the manufacturers and distributors to be able to supplement the product with cool prizes. And without the cool prizes, then the hardcore players, the people who do care about being able to win a card that they can turn around and flip for $80, those players have other things to do. Just every step along the way, the incentives don't line up to create that highly competitive, serious tournament environment that I really want to be a part of. And that's a bummer. That really sucks because what I want is competitive experience where I can walk into a store and find pickup games and people to play against and test myself in these new environments. But I would also want to do that with the game of Versus. And unfortunately, that's just not an option I have. It seems like more and more the only way to play Versus is going to be the handful of stores that really, really support the game, either because the owner or some prime mover at the store is passionate about Versus, or as a store kind of doing a favor for an active, engaged member of their community. And there just aren't enough of us to create that. Hey, I'm in Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm gonna bring a couple decks and just show up at a random shop and be able to catch a game. Um, I kind of forgot how much I love that. Going to a town, having a couple extra hours after my kid's sporting event is over, and just finding the local game store showing up with a deck, and there's multiple people there who I can play against. That's not something I've ever been able to do with Versus, and I kind of forgot how much I love it. And that's tough. That's tough because this is my favorite game mechanically, thematically. And it's in such a cool spot with the Mortal Kombat and the boys and all these different IPs coming in. There's like so much to love about this game. But if you can't get people to play it, like you can have the best game in the world, but if it sits on the shelf because every time you bring it to the game store, there's nobody to play it with, that's almost worse than not having the game at all in a way. Um, so I'm struggling a little bit. I have these competing passions where I really want to play versus, but it's also like while my kids were young, I had to take a huge step back from in-person competitive play. And now that my kids are a little older and I can start actually going to tournaments again, I look around and the tournaments that I see, they they're not versus. So what do I do? I mean, I guess I can dive back into playing on webcam, but now that this fire has been reopened or reignited in me about wanting to go and compete in person and have those experiences, webcam just doesn't quite scratch the itch in the same way. So I'm in a weird spot when it comes to versus. I really want to play, but I also really want to compete. And since I can't compete in versus, my attention is increasingly getting kind of tugged towards the games where I know the thought that I'm investing in building this deck right now, I'm going to be able to go test it tonight at the shop. And there's going to be 10 different people there that I can test it against. And then there's going to be a tournament this next weekend. Like, man, I wish I could have that kind of energy going for versus. Um, and it's just kind of sad to me where the game is ending up. I think there's a lot of factors that play into it, and the distribution model is certainly one of them. Like we can't deny that. As consumer friendly, as excited as it made me to be able to buy the card game and have every card, it just there's some players that are not interested in getting involved in the game if there isn't the I get to flip cards and sell them kind of incentive. And there's some players that aren't interested in getting in the game if there isn't like a super hardcore active tournament scene. So like we're losing so many swaths of the card game demographic that at the end of the day, the community here that we have for Versus is really special. It's a unique and cool thing, and I treasure these friendships, both really close ones that I've developed over the years, and the peripheral like acquaintance level friendships. Uh, but for everyone, like we've made such a special corner of the internet, which it can be such a toxic place, that I just wish, I just wish the game was more like, and maybe if that was the case, maybe if it had more popularity, more events, then maybe it would be less special. Maybe this corner of the internet that is the versus community would have more toxic nonsense and it would feel more like other corners of the internet built up around specific card games. But it just, man, driving to a store and then having somebody, some people I know show up that I didn't know were going to be there and just, oh, hey, it's cool to see you. Like that kind of experience is something that Versus has not really been able to provide for all the positives. And there's a lot of positives, but there are some things that this game just has not ever been able to figure out or accomplish. And, uh, and that bums me out because these are things that I want. I want to have a circuit of game stores that I can drive to, in that hour, 2 hour radius around where I live. Like being able to go out and seek competition in other communities. This is really cool. I thoroughly enjoy this, and I, I'm reached the point where I've rambled enough. I'm starting to repeat myself, but I kind of forgotten how much I love the pressure and the nervousness and everything that goes along with taking yourself out of your comfort zone, out of your environment where you know everybody and driving down the road to go fight at somebody else's store. That's super cool. And it was really cool to be able to share that with my kid, which is another element that I haven't even really touched on. But the fact that you can play Star Wars Unlimited under the age of 18 and actually compete, and that's totally okay. And you can't play versus under the age of 18 and actually compete. That is just one more data point that is sort of driving this wedge in my heart between me and the game that I have most loved in my life. Like this versus 2PCG is such a fantastic game, uh, and it's gotten an unfair shake in a bunch of different ways. Uh, tied to sort of the animosity that surrounded the death of old verses, the new distribution model, the various rocky start issues that we've had with print quality, game balance, delays, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like this is the scrappy little card game that could, despite all of the odds, all of the challenges arrayed against Versus 2 PCG being a success. This game has lasted almost a decade, which in card game terms is like infinity. You know, most card games die in a couple of years. That's just true. And it's been so cool to be on Versus for this basically the whole ride, to see this game from start to hopefully not finish anytime soon, but like let's not be Pollyanna. Like things are changing in directions that are concerning. Um, and I kind of wonder where, like, if the ultimate thing is what I want is a game that has gameplay that I really enjoy and has a competitive scene where I don't have to be the person who organizes the tournaments in order to be able to play in the tournaments, like that sort of thing. I want to be able to compete in tournaments that are run by people who I don't personally know, not because that dynamic is important to me, but because is if there are tournaments being put on by people I don't personally know, it means there's a high volume of tournaments, essentially. Um, like, I don't think that's wrong to want to have that level of competition. I mean, I'd prefer to have that level of competition in verses, but this whole episode was kind of outlining my observations about why that probably is unlikely to happen. If it was, I think if this game was going to take off and we were going to have that kind of explosion, we've had the opportunity a few times. Like when the game first released, when the game switched release models, when the game brought in Civil War, and then last year with AEW. Like if the game was going to explode in popularity and it hasn't at any of those potential explosive points, I think we just have to accept that Versus is what it is. This is the type of game that we've got. And as great as this game is, and as fantastic as this community is, at the end of the day, this is not going to provide the kind of competitive environment where you're going to be able to go out and get two, three versus tournaments in a weekend. And whatever the specific reason or reasons are for that, it kind of doesn't matter. Like, that's just the truth. That's just where we're at. And as much as I hate to say it, my desire to be able to go out and compete in a couple tournaments on the weekend, now that my kids are older, now that I have that time, that's a really strong pull. And the idea that I would play a game or focus on a game that I like less just because the opportunity to play it is so much more available. That's a weird kind of dynamic to have to wrestle with. You know, like compared to, say, Magic, I had no problem for many, many years choosing not to play Magic, even though, because that's a game I like a lot less. I'll still play Magic. There's things about it I love. I owe a lot of what my life became to my relationship with Magic, for sure. But at the end of the day, that's a game I didn't have that much of an issue walking away from. Like, if the choice is do you want to play Magic or play Versus, I want to play Versus 10 times out of 10. Like, it's just a better game overall, as much as there's things about Magic that I enjoy. Star Wars Unlimited, on the other hand, is a game that I like almost as much as Versus. So if Versus is like a 10 and Magic is like a 6, the the gap between them is great enough that I'm still going to put my primary attention onto Versus because I like it so much more, even though Versus isn't able to check the box of giving me the kind of competitive experiences that I want. But if Star Wars Unlimited is a 9 and Versus is a 10, well, now I have a game that can emphatically check the competitive boxes that I want checked in a shockingly uh, there's just so many places to compete. Like if I was willing to drive 3 hours, I would be able to play Star Wars basically every night of the week if I wanted to. There's so many places to play, and the game is almost as good as Versus. Like it's close enough that it's definitely pushing my competitive attention in other directions. And I still love versus. I still want to play versus, but it's man, it's really hard to get excited and pour that like creative energy into trying to come up with cool decks, knowing that like, well, I'll be able to play them against Whitman and maybe the fellas on Friday, and that's it. Like, there's no competitive outlet for that outside of potentially getting signed up into the webcam stuff. Which again, I don't want to throw shade at webcam stuff. It's very cool to play over webcam. I love that we have that. That's just not where my attention is at this specific moment. I have forgotten how much I love in-person competition, particularly against like total strangers in strange environments. Like, it's just not quite the same as when I go to a versus event. It's like returning to summer camp. Like, everybody in the room is a friend. Like, I love all y'all, and it's a great time. But it's not quite the same as competing against a room full of strangers. And that's something I just am interested in doing at this moment in time. Does that mean I'm forever gonna put more competitive attention on games other than versus? Well, no, obviously not. Like, I have always and will continue to always play a ton of different games. Um, but as far as the hardcore competition stuff, I think for at least the foreseeable future, my hardcore tournament analysis is kind of fading from versus. Now, that means I'm probably going to be able to go back and look at cards that have existed that I maybe panned before. And it's like, well, let's try to do something fun with this. Let's play with silly decks. So I think that's the direction I'm probably going to head with this show for the next little while, at least through the summer. I think I'm going to take a slightly more casual approach to card analysis for versus and kind of remember some of the kitchen table fun that this game offers, because the competitive analysis, while that's still something I so deeply love, um, it's just not it's just not checking the box for me at this moment in time. My competitive attention is being pulled away from versus, at least for the time being. So that's where we're standing. I think, I don't know. I started this by saying I didn't really have a conclusion, and I feel like I'm kind of coming to a conclusion here, but I'm not confident that that's going to stick. At the end of the day, what I really want is to play versus against a ton of different people like every weekend. And I just can't have all of those things. And what that ultimately means, like long term, is probably that I'm going to play versus more casually and try to scratch that competitive itch in a game that actually has the competitive framework for me to do that. And that's a bummer. Like, I'd really rather just play versus, but it is what it is. So, okay. This has been a rambly, think out loud kind of show. I appreciate it if you stuck with me through this whole thing. I'm Mr. Ben. This is the build phase, and you should go win some games.